Info Plus.
स्वागत छ यहाँ हेर्दै हुनुहुन्छ कार्यक्रम इन्फो प्लस नेपालकै पहिलो र एकमात्र शैक्षिक कार्यक्रम। आज भने हामी आइपुगेका छौं ग्लोबल रिचको सिडनी अफिसमा र मसँग हुनुहुन्छ रवि लोचन सिंह जी। He is the head of Global Reach. Thank you so much for coming on to the show and for having us in your office.
No, it's wonderful having you in Australia.
Yes, it's wonderful to be here. So great to see and tour a bit of your office as well. Now, Global Reach has been a name and a brand that Nepali students from all over the world also recognize. But if you had to, look back at all these years, how do you look at this journey of Global Reach?
Well, I came here as an international student in 1990. Now, that's about 32 years ago. And it was my desire to study overseas after having done a bachelor's in India from Delhi University. And I came and studied in Australia for a master's, for an MBA. Now, what happened is after when I went back in 1991, I realized that students find it very difficult to get the right advice. And just think of an era, I know it will be very difficult for you to understand that, when there is no internet. And in 1991, there was no internet. A student used to apply to universities based on someone telling them which university. They would send an email to the university for a brochure. If they are lucky, they would get a brochure in mail and then they would put in an application. It was an extremely difficult journey to take. And in fact, around 1991-92, India had started liberalizing its economy. Now, that led to many parents wanting their children to study overseas. Now, this is where Global Reach really fitted in. It started very small. And then over a period of time, almost all universities in Australia, in fact, all universities in Australia, and then, of course, all universities in New Zealand, over 600 universities worldwide, including universities from Canada, the UK, and the US, they all signed up Global Reach to represent them in India. Then, a few years later, say around 1996, 1997, Global Reach opened its operations in Nepal. And this was a time when Nepalese students were also finding it very difficult to travel overseas. Right. And the information available in Nepal was limited to a few colleges and a few small agents. And this is when Global Reach brought university education information in Nepal, and that's good over 15 years ago. And today, I would think that our Nepal operations is possibly a very major contributor to our overall business. And Australian universities reckon, and they often consider Global Reach as a source of information on Nepalese students and the Nepal market.
During 1990s, when there was no internet, very limited access to information, organizations like Global Reach did and have done a fantastic job. How has that scenario changed when the information is available on the tip of everybody's fingertips, especially students who are overly active researching about colleges and campuses and universities, scholarships, visa? Do you find that students sometimes come to you, ask the questions, but they already have the answer with them?
Absolutely, Sadiksha, but at the same time, internet can give you information and can also misguide you. It's almost like medical advice that we take from the internet. So what we get is the students do browse. They have friends here. There's social media too, where they are part of various groups, and they often are able to reconfirm some of the advice that Global Reach gives them. And I think this is a very healthy thing to happen. In fact, we feel less responsible for the actions of the students. And what I have often seen is the students contribute about 80 to 90% of our business through where it comes through word of mouth. So if a student has already traveled overseas from Nepal, and if a current student is talking to that student, I think that's the best part of our business. And we encourage that quite a bit.
How do you see the new trend now in the 1990s? How was it 2000s? And now moving into 2022, post-pandemic, do you see a kind of shift or a change?
I think there are several changes because you are now looking at 3 decades. When I came here in 1991, I was part of 200 students who had come from subcontinent to Australia. There wasn't really that kind of inflow as we see now. And today, we are sitting in Sydney, which is part of New South Wales. Nepalese student numbers are rivaling Indian student numbers in New South Wales.
Wow.
It was unheard of at that point of time. Of course, when we talk largely, we talk of China and India. But when you really look at subcontinent, Nepalese student numbers in Sydney primarily is at a record high. There are areas here which have large Nepalese population. Most of the restaurants or shopping centers cannot function without the Nepalese international students contributing to that. And it is a fact that the Nepalese students actually earn significant portions of their expenses through part-time work. They are extremely hardworking. And what's most important, I think, is that they're leaving a mark here in Australia. And a lot of people are getting used to Nepalese cuisine, Nepalese food, and Nepalese language. I mean, we are sitting here in an area which is called the Little India. It's called Harris Park. But if you take a stroll down the street, you'll find at least 4 Nepalese restaurants, and there'll be 5 other shops which will be catering to the Nepalese audience. So now when you think of it, I look at it in a very positive way. It's a mark which Nepal has left in Australia. Students are able to earn through part-time work, and they fund their education. And many of them are getting on and moving on and making a life for themselves, getting permanent residency or even taking citizenship. And I think I again look at it in a very positive way. Education as a pathway to work and settlement has been there across all destinations. Why do Indian students go to US? Or why do they go to Canada? They all go there with an aspiration to make a better life for themselves. About 80 to 90% of students would do that. So if Nepalese students do that, what's the problem in that? I think it's wonderful.
Post-pandemic, international students have been allowed to work unlimited hours or work full-time per se, right? But I think starting from June, that's going to change. Have you interacted with international students? Do they seem worried about it? Are they disappointed, or are they happy saying that now I get to finally focus on my studies and not be tempted to work so much?
Well, I know the Australian government did extend the unlimited work rights till June next year. But I'm one of those who believe that it shouldn't have happened, because students do come here with the prime focus of doing their studies. And if they are studying, they aren't really left with so much time to do full-time work. So because if they start working full-time, then your focus from studies goes away. And then you want to move from a good university to a small college so that they can attend less classes. And I think that's a wrong psychology to have. The students, when they arrive, they should complete their degree. And even while the degree, even if they're working that 20 hours per week, which is about 40 hours per fortnight, and they are not being paid the regular legal wage, that's more than enough to cover their living expenses. Why do they need to really work unlimited hours? I know it's there till June, but it had to go away at some point of time. And it was initiated not because people were concerned about the students, but just because Australia was in shortage of workers. So are we bringing workers here, or we are bringing students here? That's something which we need to decide. So I think it's a positive thing. Students, whichever student talks to us, we tell them time to focus on your studies, get your grades, do well, get into a skilled occupation thereafter. And that is what will be working in the long term.
In your experience, have students been able to fairly well manage their living expense, accommodation, food, and tuition fees?
Well, I think things have changed over the last couple of years. Ever since the pandemic, most universities have had very liberal scholarships. And in fact, it's very rare to find a student who's not getting some help or other. Now, when you really think of it in the other way, that if you are paying per semester, you found a university right in the very beginning based on your own paying abilities, and then you're doing some part-time work to cover your living expenses. Education is not an expense, it's an investment. where the return should be coming over your lifetime. And this is something which the students need to understand. Now, you talked about students moving from one college to another. How do they move? Do they plan that they're going to move? No, they don't. They come here and they are guided by some people for their own agenda and for their own interests, telling them that, hey, you're going to an X university, which is going to cost $30,000. You go to a Y university, which will cost you $25,000, or it could be even a college, which will cost you $15,000. And you're saving money, and it's a saving for life. But that's not. You are moved away from a degree to a diploma sometimes. The diploma doesn't give you post-study work rights. The degree gives you post-study work rights. And the degree holds you in better steam for a long-term employment, not a part-time. This is not what they're going to do throughout their life. So when you really thinking in that way, things are changing. Our good students are able to stay on, complete the degree, and I'm sure you'll meet them while you're traveling around Australia. They're doing very well for themselves.
Yes, definitely. I think our trip, this journey to Australia, season 5, has been fantastic, where I've been able to interact with many Nepalese students who are here on 100% scholarship, 35% scholarship, are doing 2 jobs. That's the thing that we discovered. It doesn't always have to be a sad story of students who come here. There, of course, are some stories of struggle, but also there are stories to celebrate. There's stories where Nepali students are doing exceptionally well, where the colleges are really pushing them forward as star students. So that is definitely a moment to be proud. As a Nepali coming to Australia, looking at another Nepali student just thriving and growing so much. Now, like you rightly mentioned, there has to be a good guidance, and students should not be misinformed or tempted in short-term savings or short-term goals, right? In your perspective, with this changing era, do you think Global Reach has or can do these changes, incorporate these changes to guide the students better?
Well, we've always done that, and we will continue to do it. That's the thing. That's the difference between an company or an agency or a consultancy which has been around for 3 decades. Would we survive 3 decades if we were misguiding students? It won't happen. And that's why you often find new agencies coming up and closing doors as quickly as they have opened. Global Reach has been around for 30 plus years, 31 years around the subcontinent, over 15 years in Nepal per se. And I believe that we will continue to work very closely. We are in the long-term interest of the student, because that's where our money comes in from. A student needs to be happy. A student needs to be guided well. And every happy student brings us for more students.
Looking forward, if you had to guide these students who are eagerly waiting to just step onto Australia to start a better life and future, what would you suggest are some of the up-and-coming careers or courses that are new that they could really thrive in?
I think there are 2 things. One, first and foremost, homework which a student needs to do is improve their communication abilities. A student manages to come into Australia by hook or crook with a very weak English communication ability will always struggle. They won't get the best of part-time jobs, they won't be able to complete their assignments, and eventually they'll be asking others to complete the assignments. So before they come into Australia, they need to work on their English abilities. So all the jobs that you are looking at the Nepalese students entering into, whether it's the nursing or whether it's engineering or aged care or whatever it might be, all of them require very high level of communication abilities. And this is something sometimes is not communicated to the Nepalese students properly. If you are looking at coming to Australia, be prepared to work hard. Look for courses in STEM area if it is a degree oriented. If it is vocational, then look at the medium and long-term skill shortage list. Look at the occupation which seem to be in long-term shortage in Australia. And these are in various areas. Nursing is indeed very popular amongst Nepalese students, but nursing also requires very high level of English skills, a 7 band across all the bands of IELTS. So what I would say is students work on it. And Australia is a wonderful place to even come to for married students, where the spouses have full-time work rights, especially at the postgraduate level. And that helps them cover expenses. So when we really think of coming into Australia, look at the occupations which are on demand. And this list keeps changing all the time, and be aware of them. Students can also consider locations outside of Sydney. What I'm often finding is students come to Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane, and then maybe 1 or 2 years down the line want to move to other locations, say Newcastle or Canberra or Wollongong or Adelaide or Tasmania. because that gives them additional points and gives them additional post-study work. I think Nepalese students can come to these locations directly without the need to come to a university in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane if their goal is to get those extra points. What's the point of coming here and then getting to move and resettle yourself in another location? That advice, again, Global Reach can give. We are not migration agents, but we represent every single university in Australia. So we are like a departmental store. You walk into a departmental store, all the brands are available. You look around, feel them, know about them, and then make your pick.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mr. Singh, for taking out this lovely time and interacting with us. I'm sure your vast experience and knowledge spanning over 30 years has been and will be very helpful to each and international student that steps into Global Reach.
No, wonderful, Sadiksha. Enjoy your stay in Australia. There are many things to do outside the interview.
Yes.
Please go out and look out at the beautiful Sydney that presents itself. You are in Australia at a wonderful time where the summer is just approaching, and you'll find the beaches full, the Sydney Opera House full, teeming with people, and go out and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you very much. Lovely talking.
Thank you. Thank you.
Info Plus for genuine information.